Hello, boys and girls, and all you college graduates looking for a job. Welcome to Module 7 of Life Launch. This is where we're going to talk about interviews. So I know that some of you are skipping around, so you certainly want to watch this before you go to an interview. We're going to talk about the 5 different types of interviews, but we're going to concentrate on a couple of them. So we'll cover that in a minute. After this module will be salary negotiations and how to juggle multiple offers, and then finally onboarding and how to position yourself for your first promotion. So you're almost to the end of the course. I hope you'll enjoy this session. So let's talk about the 5 different types of interviews that you'll run into in your job search. So the first type is a screening interview where an employer is just trying to find out if they want to talk to you further. So that's a very important interview to know how to handle. And then there's 3 different types of interviews. You might call them networking interviews. So the first one is a candidate in waiting interview. That you would approach an employer about a particular type of opportunity, whether they're recruiting or not. Next is an advice interview where you simply meet with somebody, anybody at all, and say, I'm about to graduate from college or I've already graduated. I wonder what your advice would be for me. And then an informational interview. That's a very important type of interview because it gives you access to people in the industry that you have targeted when they're not recruiting. So those are very important types of interviews for running the hidden job market that we talked about in the last module. And then finally, there's the interview for a posted opening or a known opening. And that's the very classical, traditional interview for a job. So what kind of prep should you do before you go to an interview? Frankly, any kind of interview. So one of the things you need to develop is some hero stories, some stories you can tell about you performing really well. So how do you start with that? I want you to build a list of about, say, 15 to 30 times that you were really proud of yourself, that you thought you did a great job. And you can use any part of your background to do this with. And you take that list, maybe 30 little stories, and you turn it into maybe a dozen fully developed hero stories, at least 7. You definitely want 7 in your back pocket. So that's preparation for any interview. A hero story is when you did something above and beyond the call of duty, when you nailed something, when you were a hero. So screening interviews are the first type of interview you're going to run into. That's when an employer is not sure if they want to invest time to bring you to their location or visit you where you are. Usually it will take place by phone or by Skype or some teleconference technology. If you get a chance, choose the visual technology like Skype so that people can see how professional you appear. And of course, you'll treat it just like a regular in-person interview. Now, there's some rules to screening interviews. One of them is never hesitate and try not to ever say no. So if they ask you if you want to do something and you're not sure if you want to, say, that sounds interesting, can you tell me more about it? Don't say no. So if they say to you, we want you to go to lower dusty nowhere and work with rattlesnakes, and your first response is, no, I don't want to do that. But don't say that. Say, that sounds really intriguing, can you tell me more? Because you never know. They might say, well, we want you to go to lower dusty nowhere and work with rattlesnakes, and we're going to film you as the pilot for an adventure television series. And after that, we're going to send you to Oktoberfest in Germany and then Carnival in Brazil. So now you're super interested. That's kind of an example of what I mean. I even had a candidate that once lost a job interview because he hesitated in a screening interview. They said to him, would you be comfortable in the heat of the South? And he was from up north. And he said, just the slightest little pause before he said, no problem at all. But they didn't forget that pause. Be enthusiastic, choose the visual option, dress seriously for it, and be ready to tell them what you can do for them. The next type of interview that I want to talk about is the candidate in waiting interview. That's one of the 3 types of interviews you use to crack the hidden job market open. I have some research that shows you have a 2/3 chance of getting a job if you can get 10 of your friends to introduce you to their boss. Now, boss's time is valuable. So you contact the boss and you say, boss, I'm looking for a very particular type of job. Let's say it's copywriter. Okay, here's my background relative to copywriting. I'd like to stop by, drop off a resume, shake your hand. I won't take but a couple minutes of your time, quick in and out of your office so you know you will think of me in case something opens up later. That's a candidate in waiting interview. So much information is conveyed visually. If you just shake their hand and are in their office for 30 seconds, it can result in a job offer later. You have to say exactly what you want to do, though, for a candidate in waiting interview. So you can't say, I want a job with your company. You have to say, I want to work in accounting, I want to be a copywriter. You have to be very specific. So the next type of interview that I want you to think about is an advice interview. And the nice thing about that is you can interview with anybody for advice. A powerful person, a person in a different industry than you are, etc., etc., etc. So you basically tell them, I'm not applying for a position with your firm. I'm just, I'm a graduate, I'm looking for a position. I wonder if you would look at my resume, just talk to me about your career and let me talk to you a little bit about my interests and see what advice you have for me. Now, you have to mean it when you say I'm not applying for a position with your firm. This is not a trick to get in someone's office. So the third type of interview that you use in the hidden job market is the informational interview. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's suppose you're a candidate. This is what candidates look like. They're younger and they have hair. So when a candidate meets somebody for an informational interview, they have to remember that they're there to find out what a career is like that's very specific. So that's the difference between an advice interview and an informational interview. Advice is wide open. Informational interview, you're trying to interview for a specific type of job. So you've come into somebody's space and you're going to ask them about their career. The ideal person to meet for an informational interview is somebody 2 to 5 years ahead of you. You know that big senior vice president that hasn't looked for a job in 30 years? They're not the best person actually to interview with for informational interviewing. Somebody just a little ahead of you is perfect. So here they are, they're interviewing you. The first thing you ask them is, can you tell me a little bit about your career and what's made you successful in it? And this is a great way to open because everybody loves to talk about themselves. I'm going to put up on the screen all the informational interviewing questions so that you know what to ask somebody, because you have to drive an informational interview. They're not going to ask you questions, you're going to ask them questions. And here they are. After you say, how did you get into this, say, what kind of preparation is typical to get into this? Is that really required or just the typical approach? That's because a lot of times the secret sauce or the secret side door is just not obvious, and they'll tell you. What was different from what you expected? What was the biggest surprise when you went into this field? Are there any myths you want to shatter for me? And that gets you the insider knowledge that you need so that when you interview the next time with somebody in this field, you're going to know the secret handshake and the secret sauce recipe. Then ask, who else does this? What other companies? Who else should I be talking to? Because sometimes this really sends you in a direction that is more fruitful than you've at first thought. And question number 5, if you're keeping count, what ensures continued advancement? And then number 6, what is the typical career path out of this position or field? What does this prepare you for next? For example, what's next for you? Then number 7, always ask something open-ended. For example, you might say, what advice do you have for someone like me? And you can also, if you're clever, you can ask a little bit about money. So you don't ask them about their money, how much money they make, or how much money their company pays. You say, what would be typical pay for a position like this industry-wide? And that'll give you that information without putting the person on the spot. Informational interviewing is how you become an insider and how you get the insider lingo that allows the next person to hire you. Not that person, but the next one. Now let's say you're the boss and you're on this side of the desk. Why do you take an informational interview? You do it as a courtesy, really as a favor. So the last thing you want is for somebody to come in that says they're just looking for information and they suddenly start acting like a job candidate. So be really careful to be clear that you're just trying to get advice and counsel for them and learn more about a specific type of opportunity. Now, if you find out they're hiring people like you, don't start acting like a job candidate. Actually ask for permission to apply for the job. So you'd say something to the boss like, wow, that sounds like a really fascinating opportunity. How would I go about formally applying for a position like that? And then follow their advice. You won't get in trouble if you use that method. Have a great time informational interviewing. It is one of the strongest ways to meet people who can help you get your career launched right after college. Now let's talk about interviewing for a position. This is when you're actually in someone's office trying to apply for a specific open opportunity or a very specific type of opportunity. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, I want you to think of this as business theater. So you're on stage before you even get to the building. So what does that mean? Well, it means, for one thing, think about the car you're driving. Your suit and clothes, all of that becomes part of your image even before you get into somebody's office. So you want to be at the right spot at the time the interview begins. And for the Silicon Valley, for example, someone says your meeting is at 9 o'clock. Well, your first stop at security needs to probably take place like 20 minutes ahead of them. So you need to ask people, when you say 9 o'clock, do you mean in your office at 9, at the parking lot at 9? Is there a security break before I get there? So you need to find that out. Next, let's talk about what you're going to wear. What you wear to an interview will definitely keep you from being hired. It won't get you hired, but it'll keep you from getting hired. So you need to take the time and the trouble to find out what people wear that work there. You want to look like you work there already and that you're dressed for a day when a bigwig visits from out of town. So you want to dress up, but not overdress. You can definitely overdress. So that's a little bit of guidelines there. Let's talk about coming into the space of the office. When you come into the space of the office and you meet the first person, perhaps a receptionist, you have to realize that they're taking notes on you. They're watching you carefully. I actually know of an investment banking firm that when you interview, they put you at a big table, and on that table are some, I would call them, glamour magazines and some celebrity magazines and some business magazines. If you touch the glamour magazines or you pick up the celebrity magazines, the receptionist makes a note on your card and you will not be hired. So that's already, you're in public in the waiting room. So then you come in, you actually meet the big boss. They're going to shake your hand. Handshakes are really important. In the United States and Mexico and France, a handshake is an indication of your trustworthiness. If you doubt your handshake, get some practice with some friends today. So you're going to shake your hand, they're going to look you right in the face, and they're going to say, you know, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And that's your first big test. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself is not an invitation for you to ramble on about non-business things. So this is about your background and your skill set relative to my needs, whether I'm a nonprofit or a government agency or a Wall Street banking firm. So you want to be able to sit down and explain to me why you have come and taken up space in my day and what you can do for me. So it's a business question with a business answer, and you should script this out in advance. So there's some examples that are on my website. Check them out. Take a look at the ones in the books so that you can answer that question, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, effectively, and draw it to a close. Let's review a couple of the other really classic questions because I think that you need to be able to answer them. What are your strengths? If you can't answer what your strengths are, you're not going to be hired. So I'm going to leave that to you. But I do want to talk about what are your weaknesses. I want you to pick a weakness that's a real weakness, but it's either not that big a deal or it's something you're working on already. So don't tell people I work so much I don't smell the roses. I mean, that just gets really old if you interview people. So this would be an example. You know, someone says, what are your weaknesses? You might say, when I got to college, I realized that some of the other students had a bigger vocabulary than I had, and that really bothered me because I think of myself as a very bright guy. So I decided to do something about it, and I began to study SAT word books, and I even got some on my phone so that while I'm waiting in line for coffee, I can do a few SAT and GRE words, and I've really improved my loquaciousness using this methodology. That's an example of a kind of a small flaw that you've already fixed. That's how you answer, what are your weaknesses? Now, this is my favorite one of all. Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I like it when a candidate says this. You know, it's really interesting that you would ask that because I've been wanting to ask you this. Where could I be in this company if I really deliver fantastic performance for 5 or 10 years? What's possible here? That's a great answer to that question and puts it back on them. You know the rest of the kind of the classics. Do you like to work alone or in a group? You don't make up a person that you're not, but try to make sure that you're matching the job that you're interviewing for on that day. So that brings me to behavioral interviewing questions. Behavioral interviewing questions all start with the following structure. Can you tell me about a time when? Now, when you hear those words, you need to remember, it's a behavioral interviewing question. So it has to be answered with a specific story from your past. Don't give a policy answer. So if somebody says to you, tell me about a time when you had a problem with a supervisor, and you say something like, well, I think it's important to get along with your supervisor. That's not answering the question. You're giving a policy answer. They're looking for an actual story. Now, whenever you hear behavioral interviewing questions, remember, that's when you engage your hero stories. Those stories that I ask you to compile before you go out to interview. So I want to teach you a structure for telling a business story, especially hero stories, that's effective and can allow you as a recent college graduate to kind of structure your response in a way that impresses people. It's called PARLA. Problem, analysis, action, the result of the action, and because it's a hero story, you know the result was highly positive. What did you learn from this event? And how did you apply that learning in new settings? That's Parla. So if somebody says to you, tell me about a time when you had a problem with a team member, using Parla, you would say something like this. Well, I was on a team in school when we had a joint project. There were 4 of us. And frankly, one of the people was letting us down. She was kind of late to a lot of meetings, and her work product was either perfunctory or she even missed some deadlines. The other people, I was kind of the leader of the team. We didn't really have a named leader, but people acted like I was the leader, and I took that role. And 2 of the people came to me and said, you got to talk to Paula. She's letting us down. It's your job to manage this. So you talk to Paula and get her up to speed. So I took this role and I went to Paula and I said, you're letting us down. You're missing deadlines. We're disappointed. And I kind of took a tough role. And what happened next really surprised me. She burst into tears. And she said that her mother had cancer and that she was spending a lot of her weeks in school driving 100 miles over to haul her mother to medical appointments. And she was completely distracted by this. And she was very disappointed in her own performance and she wished she could do better. I felt horrible. But I made a deal with the team. I drew the team together. We had a meeting. And I said, you know, guys, Paula is without question the best presenter of us. We all know that. She was kind of like one of those people you knew was someday going to be a newscaster or weathercaster. She was very smooth in front of a group. So we decided, look, Paula, we will cover for you. We will make the project if you present it. And so we turned her loose so that she could concentrate on her family issues. And so then we did it. The project came off great. We all made an A+ because Paula was so eloquent and we had done our jobs well. And what I learned from this is don't presume why someone's not performing up to par. Do a little more investigation before you come down with a hammer. And this has really made me a lot better manager in every other chance I've had a chance to manage. That's Parla. Problem, analysis, action, result. What I learned from this is X, and how I've applied that learning in other settings is Y. Use this and tell your hero stories, and you'll come off great in an interview. Now I want to teach you a kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card. Let's say you blow a question, and you know you blow it. How do you know? One way is you can tell by watching the body language of your interviewer. They lose interest. If they lean back and stare off into the corner, you know, you're losing them. Let's say they start to check their text messages on their phone. You've totally lost that person. So if you think you gave a bad answer or you're losing the interest of your interviewer, I want you to ask what are called follow-up questions. A follow-up question is like this. You would say, did I answer your question correctly? Would that approach work in your organization? Is that what you had in mind? Those are called follow-up questions. Now, you can't ask them every time you answer a question because you'll look insecure, or appear to be insecure. But if you ask one once in a while, it draws your interviewer back to you and it will allow you to get corrective advice. For you might say, did I answer your question? And they will say, no, I asked a finance question and you gave an accounting answer. You did not actually answer the question that I asked. And it gives you a chance to say, well, how could I better address it? It gives you a chance to recover. Now, you may face that question of what will it take to bring you on board. We're going to cover that in a later module. So if you think you're going to be doing salary negotiations, jump to that module. It's Module 7, Negotiating Salary and Juggling Multiple Offers. But there's one more thing that is going to happen in the interview, and I guarantee it. At some point, they're going to turn to you and say, do you have any questions of us? And it's very important that you do have about 4 or 5 questions of them. I can give you some samples, but some of the questions should come to you as the interview progresses. But some classics are, well, I really like the organization, and I like what I'm hearing. I would love to join you. If I were to come into this company and do a great job, where could my career go? That's a good question. Here's another one. What resources would be available to help me do my job? What kind of support would I get from management? What kind of logistical support? Or, could you address that issue? That's a good question. What is the future of the company? Can you tell me more about its strategy and its competition and how it fits into the marketplace? That's a good question. So I ask 3 or 4 questions like that. If you have no questions at all, it's a very bad sign. So one last thing that you can always inquire about is what are their hiring practices and what are their procedures? How many interviews do they expect? How long will it be before you hear from them next? And you could even ask them, what are your hiring criteria and how am I standing up against those criteria? It's absolutely okay for you to ask these things. And I think you should understand them before you leave. It's important. It will help you be a better candidate. So I hope this has been useful to you to think about how to interview well. And as you do this preparation, I hope you'll practice. Practicing even in front of a mirror will make you much better. Write down some questions and practice answering them. Good luck.